The auction grounds buzzed with tension, dust rising from the parched earth beneath cowboy boots and well-worn tires. People leaned against iron rails, sipping coffee from paper cups, their eyes fixed on the massive, roped-off pen in the center of the ring. Inside, a wild stallion paced like a storm contained, muscles rippling under a coat that caught the morning sun like fire on coal. He didn't just walk. He prowled, every movement pulsing with defiance. His hooves struck the earth with a warning thud, nostrils flaring, eyes sharp and untrusting. No name hung on his pen, just a number, 47. Rumors clung to him, like flies to sweat. Some said he'd broken 5 trainers in 3 months. Others whispered about the scars beneath his mane, the gashes on his hindquarters. No one knew where he'd come from, only that he'd been rounded up from a remote canyon, alone and untouchable. The auctioneer, a portly man with a voice like gravel in a coffee grinder, chuckled into his mic and said, $1 million to anyone who can ride him. Just 10 seconds of the saddle, folks. 10 seconds. A few laughed. Some jeered. Most just watched, silently daring the next fool to try. From the back of the crowd, a young woman stepped forward, quiet but purposeful. Her boots were scuffed, jeans faded, and her hat shaded a face weathered not by age but by experience. She looked like she belonged in the background, someone you'd forget after passing her on the road. But there was a precision to her walk, an energy just beneath the surface, as if she held something barely restrained, much like the stallion before her. She didn't speak right away. She just watched him, watched the way he shook off the handler's attempts to approach, the way his ears flicked to every voice, his body coiled like a spring. She could almost feel his heartbeat from across the ring, wild, fast, mistrustful. A man with a bright belt buckle and a practiced smirk stepped beside her. "You thinking about it, sweetheart?" he asked, his tone equal parts curiosity and mockery. "You ain't the first to stand there starry-eyed." She didn't answer. He tilted his hat back. "They say he damn near killed a man last week. Tossed him like a rag doll. Cracked 3 ribs. You look like a strong wind could knock you over." "I'm not here to prove anything to you," she said, eyes still on the stallion. The smirk faded. He looked at her a beat longer before turning away with a scoff. She could feel the weight of other eyes now, spectators, skeptics, strangers amused by the possibility of a spectacle. That was all this was to them. A show. But to her, it was something else entirely. Her name was Riley. Not many people knew that, not anymore. She hadn't been to an auction in years. Not since her father passed, and the ranch was swallowed by debt. She'd walked away from the world of horses, leaving behind a life that once defined her. But she hadn't stopped dreaming about them. She hadn't stopped seeing them in the quiet hours of morning, or feeling them beneath her skin when the wind changed. She was born into horses the way others are born into legacy or ruin. And despite the silence, despite the years, that part of her had never truly died. She didn't know what brought her here today. Just a whisper in her chest that told her to come. And now, standing before this wild beast, she knew why. The stallion's eyes met hers for the first time. Just for a second. A flash. But it was enough. Not connection, not yet. Just recognition. A shared truth between 2 creatures who had both lost something vital. Something no one else could see. "Riley Jensen," she said, stepping toward the auctioneer. Her voice didn't rise, but it cut through the noise. "I'll take the challenge." A hush fell over the crowd. The auctioneer blinked. "You, what now?" "I'll ride him," she said. 10 seconds. 1 million. He laughed, an awkward, unsure sound that tried to fill the space. "You got a death wish, girl?" "No. Just a reason." More murmurs. Someone from the pen crew moved toward her, clearly ready to pull her aside and talk her down. But the auctioneer raised a hand. "You serious?" he asked. She nodded. As serious as the offer. There was a beat, a moment heavy with doubt. Then the auctioneer's smile returned, slow and greedy. "Well, folks, looks like we got ourselves a real show after all. Bring out the saddle. Let the lady try." The crew exchanged worried glances. They weren't used to women taking this kind of risk. But orders were orders. A rope was dropped, a gate unlatched, and the arena cleared. Riley walked to the center. Alone. No one followed. No one dared. The stallion watched her. His body shifted, alert, wary. She didn't move fast. She just waited. Let the dust settle. Let the silence speak. Then she did something no one expected. She took off her hat. Let her hair fall down. Slowly, she dropped to one knee and placed the hat on the ground between them like an offering. No sudden movements. Just breath. Presence. Patience. The stallion stopped pacing. She didn't look away from him, even when the wind caught the hat and rolled it slightly, even when a distant truck backfired and made others flinch. She remained still, grounded, her eyes steady. "I'm not your enemy," she whispered. "I know you don't believe that yet, but I'm not." The stallion inched closer, barely perceptible. A test. A flick of the ear. A breath shared across space. Riley extended her hand, not forward, but out and low, like a tree branch curved with age. The stallion didn't charge. He didn't bolt. He just stood there, watching her, the storm in his chest suddenly quieter. The gate crew stared in disbelief. The crowd leaned forward, speechless. Riley slowly stood. The stallion flinched, but didn't retreat. She took a single step forward, then another. When her hand brushed his shoulder, even she felt the tremble run through him, like touching raw lightning wrapped in skin. She didn't try to mount him. Not yet. This wasn't about the money. It never had been. This was about proving to him, and herself, that they weren't broken beyond repair. And as she looked into his eyes again, deeper this time, the feeling returned. That quiet whisper. He's not the only one who's been forgotten. Riley Jensen had arrived, and something told her this was just the beginning. Riley didn't sleep that night. Not really. She'd been given a cot in the stables, not far from where the wild stallion, now called only the $1 Million Horse by murmuring staff, was kept in a reinforced pen with double-latched gates. Outside, the desert wind howled like some distant, ancient thing, rattling the tin roof and whistling between the slats. She lay awake, staring at the wooden beams above her, heart ticking like a quiet metronome, rhythm slower than the thoughts that refused to stop forming. The image of the stallion's eyes kept flashing behind her lids, eyes that had seen too much, endured too much, just like her father's had in the final days, or her own reflection in the window the night she sold her last saddle and left behind the only life she'd ever known. But what startled her most wasn't the horse's power or unpredictability. It was the glimpse of something else, a plea behind a fire, something no one else seemed willing to see. He didn't want to be controlled. He wanted to be understood. At dawn, the crew rolled in, boots thudding against the ground, chatter half serious and half worried. Some offered her coffee. Others watched her like a ticking bomb. No one expected her to last, not even the handlers who'd seen her kneel in the dust and touch the stallion's shoulder. She approached his pen just as the sun broke the horizon, casting gold over the ridges and soaking the world in an almost sacred glow. He was already awake, standing still, watching her from the far corner. The bite of early morning hung between them, the cold a reminder that the desert wasn't always cruel. It could be quiet, too. Riley didn't bring ropes or saddles. She brought an old lead rope, frayed from time and use, and an apple from her bag. She didn't toss it in like a treat for a dog. She placed it down near the gate, stepped back, and waited. The stallion stared. Mistrust still simmered beneath his stillness, but the tension in his shoulders was softer now, less like a clenched fist, more like a held breath. The gate opened slowly, with a long creak. She entered, just past the threshold, letting the lead rope hang from her wrist. She didn't reach for him. She simply sat, cross-legged, in the dirt. He sniffed the apple, then kicked it away. She smiled to herself. No shortcuts. Fine by me. For hours, she stayed there. Not chasing, not commanding. Just present, whispering now and then, letting him circle, paw, snort, until the morning burned into noon and the distance between them was no longer so sharp. By the time she stood, her legs stiff from sitting so long, he had stopped pacing. He watched her instead of testing her. She backed away, careful and slow. He let her leave without a single stomp of protest. That night, she sat by the pen long after the others left, the wind quieter now. She hummed under her breath, some old lullaby she barely remembered learning. The stallion stood near the gate, not touching it, but closer than before. The next day, she brought a brush. The third day, a blanket. By the end of the week, people began stopping to watch again. Not because they expected failure now, but because something had shifted. The beast with the fire in his veins was no longer trying to tear the pen apart. He followed her movements with something approaching curiosity. A trainer with 30 years of experience stood with his arms folded, watching her every motion. "He doesn't flinch when she touches him," he muttered. "That horse flinched at shadows last week." "She's not breaking him," another whispered. "She's listening to him." But not everyone was impressed. The auctioneer, seeing dollar signs slip with each passing day, grew restless. "This isn't what we agreed to," he said on the 8th morning. "The crowd wants action, not some slow dance." "I'm not here for your crowd," Riley replied without looking up. He narrowed his eyes. "You think you've won something because he's letting you brush his back? That stallion hasn't been ridden. You want the million? Earn it. I'm not done yet. You've got 3 more days. After that, I put him back up for auction. Someone else will try, maybe with a firmer hand." Riley's jaw tightened. She said nothing more. The clock was ticking now, but she didn't rush. She couldn't. The stallion wouldn't tolerate it, and neither would her conscience. That afternoon, she brought the saddle. The sight of it sparked something in the stallion, ears pinned, nostrils flaring. She didn't blame him. For some horses, the saddle was a symbol of labor. For him, it must have meant pain, captivity, violence. She didn't approach him with it. She placed it down, several feet away, then walked back to him empty-handed. He allowed her to run her fingers along his spine again, to drape the blanket over his back. The saddle could wait. That night, she barely slept. She dreamed of her father's old ranch, of the corral under starlight, the way her dad used to lean against the fence and tell her, asterisk, "You don't tame a horse, Riley. You earn the right to ride beside one." Asterisk. She woke before dawn, heart heavy with memory. By the 11th day, she managed to rest the saddle on his back. By the 12th, she cinched it. And on the 13th day, she mounted. No buck, no bolt, just a stillness that took everyone's breath away. Riley sat atop him, both of them tense but breathing, together in the quiet. The timer hadn't started yet. The auctioneer grunted. "Doesn't count. She's not moving." "I'm not finished," she said. She tapped her heel gently. The stallion stepped forward. 1 stride, then 2. A cheer rose from the growing crowd, but she barely heard it. Her eyes never left the space ahead, her fingers gently stroking the coarse hairs of his mane. The timer buzzed. 10 seconds. She kept riding, and for the first time, the stallion didn't look caged. He looked free. But the real test wasn't over. Riley knew that. The bond was fragile, trust still forming. And as she dismounted, heart pounding, she whispered beneath her breath, "We're not done yet, are we?" The stallion didn't answer, but he didn't walk away either. The final morning came cloaked in storm clouds, ominous and low, rolling across the horizon like dark thoughts that had been left to fester. Wind coiled around the auction grounds, snapping flags and stirring dust devils into a frenzy. Yet despite the brewing weather, the crowd arrived early, swelling beyond expectation. Word had spread, carried by whispers and disbelief. The wild stallion had been ridden, and not by force, but by a quiet woman with calloused hands and patient eyes. Riley stood beside the pen, eyes fixed on the stallion, who now watched her without fear. There was something more there now, an alertness softened by trust, a recognition that hadn't existed 2 weeks before. He stepped closer to the gate as she approached, a silent greeting that made something ache in her chest. She'd come here to prove something, maybe to reclaim a piece of herself that had gone missing when her father passed and the ranch dissolved into silence. But what she found was far more than redemption. It was a partnership, unspoken and fragile, yet real. The auctioneer appeared behind her, sharp-dressed and fuming beneath a polished smile. "Today's the day," he said, tone clipped. "Don't forget why you're here." "I haven't," Riley replied without turning. "Then you'll put on a show." His voice was laced with expectation. Because if you don't, I will. This horse still needs to be sold. We're not running a sanctuary. She looked at him then. What if he's not for sale anymore? The man scoffed. Everything's for sale, especially after a performance. The timer was set. The crowd hushed as Riley led the stallion out into the open ring. Cameras clicked. Phones rose. Even those who had doubted her leaned forward, caught in the gravity of the moment. She didn't mount right away. Instead, she walked with him, hand light against his neck, her presence calm as the wind tugged at her coat. The stallion matched her step for step, no rope between them, no bridle, no bit, just a leather strap gently looped around his neck. It wasn't a statement. It was trust, plain and unspectacular, yet somehow more dazzling than any trick or spectacle. When she finally mounted, he didn't shift or shy. He waited. The timer started. Riley nudged him forward with her heels. He moved. Gracefully. Powerfully. They circled the ring, the two of them alone in motion while the world watched, silent and awestruck. She guided him through a series of turns, transitions between walk, trot, and a slow, steady canter. It wasn't flashy. It was elegant, honest. At the 30-second mark, someone began to clap. Then another joined. And another. But not everyone applauded. A voice cut through the rising cheer, a sharp bark from the auctioneer's microphone. Let's see what happens when the pressure's on. And before Riley could respond, the side gate flew open. Another horse bolted into the ring, this one wild-eyed and roped, being pulled in by two handlers who clearly struggled to keep it in check. The crowd gasped as the second horse reared, bucking against the ropes, eyes white with panic. The stallion froze beneath Riley, muscles bunching, tension crackling along his spine like live wire. He turned sharply, breathing hard, ears pinned as if remembering old chaos. Riley steadied herself. "It's okay," she whispered, leaning low, pressing her hand against his neck. "I'm here." He snorted, pawed the dirt, but didn't bolt, didn't rear, didn't throw her. Instead, he turned back toward the frightened horse. Riley didn't ask him to. He chose to. Step by step, they approached the panicked animal. Riley raised her free hand, palm up, as she spoke in a low tone. The crowd had fallen deathly silent again, watching not a performance now, but a conversation between horses, between people, between pain and peace. The stallion stopped a few feet from the roped horse, who stilled slightly, nostrils flaring. Something passed between them. Recognition, maybe. Solidarity. A brokenness familiar and mirrored. And then the roped horse lowered its head. The handlers stepped back, confused. The auctioneer stared, red-faced, unsure whether he was watching the best moment of the auction or the worst betrayal of spectacle. Riley dismounted slowly. She walked to the frightened horse and loosened the rope. The animal didn't flee. It stood still, trembling, but present. When she turned back, her stallion, her horse, was waiting, as if to ask, what now? She took the lead rope from around his neck, folded it once, then twice, and dropped it in the dirt. "I'm not riding him again," she said, loud enough for the crowd to hear. "Because I don't have to." The auctioneer moved to the center, adjusting his mic. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you've witnessed today is extraordinary. And now, let the bidding begin." But Riley stepped between him and the horse. "No." He blinked. "What?" "He's not for sale." The crowd murmured, confused. Someone near the front shouted, "What do you mean? She hasn't bought him." Riley turned, lifting her chin. "I did." "You don't have the money," the auctioneer snapped. "This was all conditional. I said I'd earn him, and I did." A new voice rose from the stands. An older man in a suit stood, slowly clapping. "I'll cover the bid," he called. "On one condition. The horse goes home with her." Another cheer erupted. The auctioneer's face went pale. Riley didn't move for a long moment. Then she nodded, once, toward the man, her eyes shining. Not with gratitude, with something deeper, relief. Completion. Later, as the storm finally broke and rain began to fall over the dusty arena, Riley stood beneath the overhang, watching her horse graze quietly beside the other once panicked gelding. She ran a hand along his back, rainwater tracing rivulets between her fingers. She'd come to tame a legend. What she'd done instead was free one. And in doing so, perhaps she'd freed herself. By the time Riley guided the stallion onto the trailer, the sky had split wide open. Rain poured in steady sheets, drumming against the aluminum roof like 1,000 frantic heartbeats. She stood there for a moment, soaked to the skin, hand resting against the horse's flank as he shifted his weight, calm and patient despite the storm. The other horse, quiet now, though still wary, stood behind him, as if taking cues from the one who'd found peace. The road out of the auction grounds was muddy and uneven, winding through the foothills like a half-forgotten memory. Riley drove in silence, windshield wipers working overtime, headlights piercing through veils of mist. The day's event spun in her mind, faces in the crowd, the disbelief, the cheers, the old man's voice rising above them all with a lifeline when she'd needed it most. She didn't even know his name. Back at her late father's ranch, now hers in name but in little else, Riley backed the trailer up to the makeshift paddock she'd patched together with old fencing and stubborn hope. The gate creaked as she swung it open, and the horses stepped into their new home with tentative grace. The stallion paused beside her, nudging her shoulder once, as if asking what came next. She didn't have an answer. The house loomed behind them, faded white siding, a sagging porch, windows that hadn't been cleaned since before her father's final illness. It was tired, hollow, more memory than home. Riley glanced at it, then back to the horses, and sighed. She didn't go inside. Instead, she pulled a wool blanket from the tack room, found a bale of hay, and settled under the overhang beside the corral. The stallion remained nearby, the storm's rhythm slowly lulling the night into stillness. She watched the rise and fall of his breath. In that steady motion, something quiet inside her began to settle too. Morning broke slowly, wrapped in fog. Riley stirred awake to the sound of soft hooves and the low snort of a horse investigating her hair. She opened her eyes to find the stallion's muzzle inches from her face. She laughed a real, surprised sound and sat up groggily. "You're still here," she murmured. "Guess that makes two of us." That day, she began rebuilding, not with grand gestures or perfect plans, but with work, mud-caked boots, blistered hands, and moments of trial that gave way to glimmers of progress. She fixed a broken gate, cleared out the old stalls, patched the roof of the barn. The horses watched her, always nearby, moving with a quiet synchronicity that grounded her more than she expected. She named the stallion Ash, for the smoke-gray hue of his coat and the way he had emerged from his own fire, not burned, but reborn. The other horse, a skittish bay she called Echo, remained cautious, lingering at a distance, but never straying far. It took longer with him, weeks of slow, measured trust. But Riley had time. More importantly, she had patience. One evening, as she poured grain into the trough, a truck rolled up the long dirt driveway. She turned, cautious, brushing her hands on her jeans. A man stepped out, tall, lean, wearing a worn hat and a coat that had seen years of trail dust. It was the old man from the auction. "Hope I'm not intruding," he said, voice gravelly but kind. She hesitated. "You're the one who paid for Ash." He nodded. "Name's Everett Cole." "Riley Hart." She shook his hand, the grip firm, respectful. Everett looked past her toward the paddock, where Ash stood watching, ears alert. "Didn't pay for him," Everett said after a pause. "Just settled a debt owed to the land." Riley frowned. "What do you mean?" Everett stepped closer, leaning against the fence. "My brother used to run wild horse roundups for the state. Not all of it was kind. He made money breaking them, breaking their spirits mostly. That stallion, Ash you call him, he came through one of those pens. I saw what they did. I tried to buy him out back then, but someone higher up said no. Said he was untamable. Meant he was worth more on paper than alive." Riley felt her chest tighten. He almost wasn't. "I know. I've watched horses all my life, girl. Never seen one look at a person the way he looked at you." She didn't know what to say to that. Everett pulled something from his coat pocket, A photograph, yellowed and creased. It showed a much younger Everett beside a stocky bay horse, with sharp eyes and a white blaze. "This was mine," he said. "Saved my life more than once. We always think we save them, but sometimes they come for us." He tucked the photo into her hand. "Keep that, just in case you forget why you're doing all this." They talked a while longer. About the land, about the wind and the weight of legacy. And whenever it left, Riley watched the dust trail behind his truck until it disappeared over the ridge. That night, she sat by the fence with Ash and Echo beside her. Stars freckled the sky, bright against the dark canvas of possibility. The ranch was still broken in places. She was too. But for the first time in a long while, the future didn't feel like something to survive. It felt like something she might grow into. She reached up and ran her fingers through Ash's mane. He turned his head slightly, leaning into the touch. "Welcome home," she whispered. And this time, she meant it.